Serious. Former cult members or friends of cult members of Reddit. What is your creepiest, scariest, or most disturbing story? And is that what made you leave? Story 1. My parents were members of an Islamic cult with a fake guru / holy man kind of thing. He used to lead group chants and things, and one time while everyone's eyes were closed chanting away in the semi-darkness, me and him locked eyes and he realized that I was laughing at how dumb it was. He had a vendetta against me since then. He turned my parents against me first, convincing them that one day in the future, he could read the future apparently, I would break their hearts and leave and destroy the family. Because they were so invested in him, they started believing it and treating me, a 13-year-old, as if I'd already committed an unspeakable act. After this, he made my parents focus on my older brother more than me, lavishing him with expensive gifts such as Gucci watches, a brand new Mitsubishi Jeep with a private plate before he even passed his driving test, and experiences like executive box seats to major sports events up and down the country plus more. This wasn't enough after he convinced all of his followers that I was mentally handicapped and needed to be kept isolated. For most of my teenage years, I would come back from school, college, university to an empty house, many times not seeing another soul for weeks. The story of my parents' retarded child spread through the entire community where it is an accepted fact now, and I can't get married because everybody just assumes that I'm mentally disabled. After this, he bankrupted my parents and family, making them pay all his bills, expenses, and rewarding them with prayers. Through a too complicated to go into now chain of events, I was given the responsibility to become a full-time parent to my 2-year-old girl cousin, so he convinced everybody that I was a P-word and molesting a baby, so I could not be left alone with her. He convinced my parents that I was their enemy, and his sons were their real sons, and to ignore me my entire life. To this day, I've never once been able to have a heart-to-heart talk with either of my parents. I've been working for 6 years now. They don't even know the name of my boss or team or even what I do. They are only interested in what day I get paid. There's been more done to me than this short amount, but I just replied because I want to say that I'm a better man than anyone has ever understood, and I forgive my parents now that bastard has finally been dragged to hell. I forgive them not because they deserve it, but because I believe that this experience made me stronger as a person. If all this could not break me through all those years, then what the F can break me now? The most disturbing thing about this cult was, firstly, there are a million holy men like this all over the world. The second most disturbing thing is how easy it is for them to gather followers who believe that they are divinely powered individuals through nothing more than cheap parlor tricks, vague prophecies, and unprovable claims, like the time he'd visited Jupiter via spirit travel. If anybody is reading this who is going through something similar, all I will say is that your family is ill. If they were a sound mind, they would not be doing these things. Be kind, be good, be better than them. Peace. Story 2. I was part of a fundamentalist Christian cult known as ATI/IBLP. Recent scandals have hit the news about the cult leader Bill Gothard when over 50 women came forward with allegations that he sexually harassed them. But that's only scratching the surface. Let me tell you my scariest experience, and just keep in mind I'm far from the only one. First off, throughout my childhood, my father and sister abused me sexually. Since the cult taught a strict familial hierarchy, with the father being top dog, then mother, then children in order of birth. As the youngest, I was bottom of the totem pole. My father would twist Bible verses to justify death threats, and more. Because ATI is a homeschool cult, it was really handy to cover up the abuse from any prying eyes. My home was a prison for 11 years until he passed of a massive heart attack, and that's not even the scariest experience. Fast forward 2 years, I'm 13 with a mother who's frantically fixated on me being a troubled child because 1. I dared resist my father's advances and argue against the abuse I was suffering, gaining me the reputation of rebellious. 2. I'm severely depressed because I'm a freaking victim and depression is considered sin. And 3. I asked too many questions as to why we believed the things we believed. You don't ask questions, needless to say. So she calls some cult members here and there, pulls some strings, and long story short, she gets me placed in a secretive program called the Log Cabin Program. They tell her very little details about it, and she tells me even less. All I know is I'm about to move to Oklahoma for a while to be fixed by nice counselors because I'm a dirty sinner. Wednesday, July 11th, 2001. I'm dropped off at a lockdown compound in the middle of nowhere, near Skiatook, Oklahoma, called Eagle Springs Training Center. They pose as a residential childcare facility for appearance's sake. This means my mother literally signs over custody of me, her own child, to a bunch of strangers in a compound in the middle of nowhere and leaves me there and goes back home far away. They assure her I'm in good hands. For the next 2 years, I am tortured, brainwashed, starved, sleep-deprived, threatened with a shotgun, punished, humiliated, interrogated, and terrorized. I lose 40 pounds in the first month or two. They take me off my medications, believing it is wrong to take them, cold turkey. I exhibit severe symptoms of withdrawal and they go ignored. I'm worked grueling hours, sent on aimless hikes and marches, scrubbing floors on my hands and knees until my knuckles are cracked and bleeding from the bleach, punished with hard labor until I'm near fainting. They had fun coming up with new and strange punishments. This implies that it is deserved. This implies that it is deserved, when in fact they are instructed specifically to break their students' will, whatever it takes. One was a forced vow of silence. You were told to never speak for days or weeks on end. If you do, you're punished further. I was given tasks designed to fail, for example, extremely short time limits on difficult tasks, in order to be punished and humiliated. I was forced to grovel and confess humiliating sins, existent and none, in front of the 30 or so members in the compound. I was given spoiled, undercooked foods, and even chemically treated water that burned my throat and left me horribly sick. I was placed in solitary confinement for 2.5 weeks, while they blared music to torture me. The song lyrics went, "Trust in the Lord, He makes no mistakes. He knoweth the end of each path that we take. For when I am tried and purified, I shall come forth as gold." Basically, it was a blatant message. You're being tortured because God loves you, and He's gonna put you through fire to melt you into gold. And gave me endless confessional papers to complete detailing what a terrible sinner I am. I was interrogated for hours on end, as well as hypnotized. I was screamed at and exercised for hours. I had no privacy. Even going to the bathroom, they would stand outside the door. I could go on and on and on. I was there for 2 years. The scariest part of all of this is that I am far from the only one. The Log Cabin program was run in Oklahoma, Indiana, and I believe an alternate version for Russian orphans was done elsewhere, either Indiana or Illinois. All of these programs secretly tortured and brainwashed children and teenagers. Many of them were so-called delinquents that committed minor petty crimes, who were ordered by judges to be shipped to these compounds and held against their wills. This runs very deep. It has never been accounted for and probably never will be. They tried to investigate alarming allegations of child abuse, some of which included beatings in Indianapolis, and the whole thing got swept under the rug. The only thing you got to hear about on the news was Gothard feeling up a bunch of women. You never hear about his systematic child torture programs. Bill Gothard and IBLP simply have their fundamentalist hands in too many pies. They will probably never be caught. Story 3. Yes, I've been part of a cult. I may as well tell you this story from the top. Cast your minds back to a time when you were 18, just out of A-levels or just finishing them, and looking forward to dealing with life. Like many of my peers, I got into my head that I wanted to go abroad and do development work. I found an organization via a newspaper advert, signed up at the recruitment weekend in Hull, and then straight after my last exam, I jetted off to Denmark to train to do what I wanted to do for 6 months. The basic idea was that I would train in Denmark, then head out to Africa to do stuff like building toilets, educating people about AIDS, general well-meaning stuff. You get the idea. Well, the first mistake happened when I arrived. That is because they forgot I was arriving. I was sat in the bloody airport for 3 hours before thinking, screw it, and got a taxi to where I was staying, making sure I charged it to the company. Anyways, about a month in, we were all put to work to clean up the school where we went to train. Myself and a friend were working on the library, and I happened on a book with a very interesting title, The History of North Korea. I read it and had a laugh at what was essentially some very weak propaganda from our friends in Asia. And then I threw it out, thinking nothing of it. Another interesting occurrence was when the school decided to have a sing-along session. Fine and dandy, but we decided not to go because we had plans of our own, mainly involving lounging around and doing nothing. One of the teachers basically busted in and ordered us out. She seemed most put out when I stayed where I was. I don't think she was equipped to deal with a narky English teenager who wasn't in a mood to put up with bullcrap. The final straw came when I found a website called Twindalert. Have a look around, I think it's still there. And noticed several odd things about this supposed charity I'd signed up with. First of all, there had recently been a police raid at their headquarters. Secondly, there were allegations of money laundering, tax evasion, false accounting, brainwashing, and best of all, gun running. Not forgetting wage slavery and shoddy treatment of its workers. So, not liking what I was reading, I emailed the link to my dad, who was a journalist at the time. He emailed back saying, "It's real. Get out of there." Oh crap. Anyways, I started to email the creator of the website in order to formulate an escape plan. The only problem was, what was meant to be a private email was posted on the website, which was monitored by the lovely people I was working with. Here's where the story gets interesting. Before I continue the video, can you please subscribe? 99.9% of people who watch me are not subscribed. So can you please subscribe now? Thank you. We were just about to go on an outward bound weekend when I was pulled off the bus regarding the email that had been sent. I was put in an office on my own with a large pissed off Danish man, oddly enough called René. He couldn't understand why I wasn't afraid of him. Could have been something to do with the lock knife which I had on my person should he try anything. So, after an hour or so of him trying to intimidate me, and me making a fool out of him, he tells me to leave the office. I get in contact with my mom over MSN, and she actually phoned up this guy and threatened him with coming over there herself with a priest bag and making life very difficult if he didn't pay for a flight home and put me on the plane. Suffice it to say, I got the plane on the understanding I wouldn't contact the media, which I did the very next day. As a postscript to this leader of this cult is now on trial. The place where I was staying has closed, and the whole organization seems thoroughly tits up. And that's the story of how I managed to screw over a Danish cult. Story 4. I was best friends with an Olympic athlete who was into Scientology. Due to his semi-fame, he was given the VIP treatment at their Hollywood Celebrity Center, where I often accompanied him. I sat in the waiting room with the likes of Lisa Marie Presley and Giovanni Ribisi while he did his auditing sessions. When he introduced me to John Travolta at one of their celebrity events, Travolta wrapped me in a bear hug and lifted me off of the ground. My friend convinced me to leave my day job and work as his personal assistant. He was doing a lot of corporate speaking appearances. I moved into his house and we lived like brothers, swimming in his pool, going to strip clubs, working out at his training gym. I had some amazing experiences, like going backstage at the American Music Awards and hanging out alone with Guns N' Roses for 2 hours. The church's publicity team wanted to set him up with a girlfriend. They set up a series of dates with very cute Scientologists, but nothing really took off. We had a lot of philosophical discussions. I found many of Scientology's aspects to be very insightful, but the money grubbing and the senior business kept me too skeptical to fall in. At one point, he made an anti-gay argument, basically saying, imagine carrying that to the extreme. We'd all die off. Things got creepy when he started asking me for rub-downs after his workouts. Then one night, inviting me to play with him, I passed. Then at a party, he propositioned my gay cousin, who immediately told me, obviously I have nothing against gays, but I felt very creeped out. He was behind on paying me because he had run up huge debts for services at the church. I left and we haven't spoken since. I feel like I got closer to the inside of Scientology than any non-Scientologist ever has. I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on with Tom Cruise, you know? Story 5. I went to a non-denominational church for a very short period of time that I believe was a cult. In the back of the church, there was a small hallway behind the altar. On one wall, there was a low bookshelf that was full of Benny Hinn videos. In the middle of the hallway, there was a smaller hallway that led up to 2 bathrooms on one left and a little room on the right, probably used for Bible study or whatever else. I was back there in the hallway one night, and the bathroom door was open with the light off. It contained a light bulb that hung from the ceiling. I kid you not, that thing flickered on by itself. That's probably the creepiest thing I saw while there. I only went a few times, but it was pretty messed up. They said I had demons oppressing me and living inside my body. I had to get counseling from several different church ministers afterward just to deal with that. Plus, there was this pressure to get people to join the church and weird dream stories people had all of the time. I remember walking in one day and seeing a chalkboard, and written on it was, "Friends don't let friends go to hell." I also remember one person talking about how they had a dream that everywhere around the town we lived in it was demons fighting and torturing people, and how the only peace could be found inside the walls of the church. The worst sin, according to them, was speaking against charismatic gifts or miracles. Even joking about that sort of thing, such as playfully touching someone on the head and saying, "Be healed," put you in danger of the Holy Spirit. Basically, if you said that any of the tongues or healings they did wasn't real or made fun of it, you were going to hell. Yeah, it was seriously weird. I left only after a few visits, so it wasn't that hard for me to leave. I left because I realized they had very bad ignorance and probably didn't know what they were really doing. Story 6. I worked for a cult. It was a private school for rich kids who had addictions. There was a dynamic leader who had an inner circle of young boys who he doted on. The school itself was somewhat abusive, untrained staff like myself administering meds, and when I started, I was able to administer PRN Thorazine. As a staff member, I had to live like the students, adhere to the same rules and regs. Then they worked to distance me from my family, telling me I had an addiction, I didn't, and that it was too dangerous for me to use my time off to see my family. I walked away after a few weeks because I thought I was too weak to work there. Then I went back and realized what a terrible place it was. Finally left with a brand new eating disorder I'd managed to avoid during my adolescence. The school shut down eventually due to lawsuits from parents. The former students have a Facebook page, and from what I can tell, many struggle with the systematic abuse they experienced. The leader has since died, and turned out all his degrees and awards were faked. It taught me a lot about safety and services for vulnerable people. The scariest moment was the student who was actively psychotic and should have been in a lockdown facility, but who was still with us. I was told to restrain him even though he wasn't fighting. He was on a hunger strike and refused to leave the building for a meeting. I had to carry him to the meeting, then restrain him the whole time. Story 7. This is probably too late to get noticed, but whatever. I used to go to a super tiny, about 100 kids K-12, Catholic school. I put Catholic in quotes because they technically weren't allowed to call themselves Catholic, because the Catholic Church thought the guy who ran it was a loose cannon. Spoilers, he was. So they said that they were a school that taught Catholic theology. It was basically a cult. We even sometimes had prophets that were friends of the principals come and tell us about their visions. Remember the swine flu? Yeah, according to one of those guys, that was gonna kill a third of us all off. Cue typical, super stereotypical fundamental ignorance about basic scientific/common sense anything. We would have debates about issues for theology class sometimes. I put debates in quotes because it was essentially rigged so that the right side would win. They made us do all sorts of messed up stuff too. Like my class one year, junior in high school, had to do a retreat for a younger class, freshmen and sophomores, basically telling them that if they kissed/dated, they were sluts. They made us stand in front of PPs with those disgusting anti-abortion signs in a downtown area, something I'm still ashamed I was forced to participate in. I was naively pro-life at the time, but even then, I knew that what we were doing was gross. Eventually, things spiraled out of control there to the point where the principal, for seemingly little to no reason, made it his life's mission to try and destroy mine. These were some messed up and creepy stories, but if you have stories of your own, feel free to write them below in the comments so I can make a video on them in the future. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. I'll see you in the next one.